Hello, friends. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I know many of you are regular listeners or watchers, so I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Mike Austin. He is a professor of philosophy, really smart guy, and he tackled a really controversial topic in this book, and we have a great conversation about God and guns in America. A couple things before we get started. Some of my videos have not had the best audio. My audio is really low. And as you can see, I'm almost like swallowing this microphone now. I'm as close as I can get. And this thing's turned up to like 9.5. It's super high. So even if it sounds quiet, I might have some issues. I'm going to try to fix it. So I apologize for that. And I've got several videos that I've already recorded. And I'm now seeing after the fact that the audio has been a little frustrating. I apologize for that. Also, if you would like to support the work that I'm doing on this YouTube channel, as you probably know, it takes a lot of time and energy to do this. So if you want to support my work, please go to the show notes. You can support me really quickly through Venmo. I just got a Venmo account, so I'm learning how to do that. And also my Patreon account. If you go to patreon.com/theology in the raw, or just check the show notes, you can become a regular supporter of the work that I'm doing at Theology in the Raw, both in this YouTube channel and in the podcast. All right, let's get to know Mike Austin to talk about this controversial topic about God and guns. All right, hey friends, I'm here with Mike Austin, author of God and Guns in America. Mike, thank you for being on the show. And my first question is, do we have a gun problem in America, and how do we go about fixing it? We'll start off with a nice and easy question.
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'd actually say we have multiple types of gun problems, right? So I'm a philosopher. I'll be annoying that way. And that there are a lot, I think there are piecemeal ways we can address it. So big picture kind of stuff, it's close to 40,000 people a year now due to gun violence, die due to gun violence every year. And that's been steadily increasing over the years. It surpassed death by auto accidents in recent years. And I would say, I think one thing a lot of people, it doesn't get discussed as much, roughly 2/3 of those deaths are by suicide. And so there might be different ways to address that than some of these other concerns. You know, the mass shootings get, when they happen periodically, all the publicity and all the discussion about background checks and other things. And I think I think there's merit to some of those policy changes. But at the core, you know, we can we can reduce deaths by gun violence if we do two things, right? If the church is more the church, and if there's more therapeutic interventions with people, and if guns in homes are stored safely.
So you're not
Yeah.
advocating for reducing the number of guns, just more responsible possession or use of them, or is it a both and?
Yeah, I don't even know how. I mean, there's so many guns in America, right? I mean, I think more guns are the same number of guns as people,
Yeah.
although the people that actually own them, there's a small number that own a large amount of guns. So an example, an acquaintance of mine in town, someone else, a mutual acquaintance, told me he has about $250,000 worth of guns in a safe in his house. And so that's a lot of guns that one guy's got. Um, so yeah, in some ways, I think we should reduce the number of guns only because that allows ease of access, and they easily get into the hands of people who will use them for, immoral purposes. But the primary argument of the book in terms of policy is that we can reduce gun violence while protecting the rights of responsible gun owners, and that followers of Christ have really good reasons grounded in their faith to do that. So there are policies, there are moral and spiritual things to address, right? It's a big thing, but we can make progress.
Can you speak to like what specific maybe gun law reforms you would see as most urgent? I've heard that like at gun is it gun fairs or something where it's really easy to get a gun, or background checks, or somebody has had some mental health issues in the past that sometimes doesn't go checked. Am I along the right lines here, or what would you say to
Yeah,
improving gun laws?
yeah, I think that's one thing that could be done. People call it the background check loophole, right? So if you go to a federally licensed gun dealer, they do a check. But several years ago, there's this like huge open air sort of I don't even know what to call it, flea market thing near our
Yeah.
house. And we walked to one, and there are guns I mean, just everywhere sitting out. And I grew up in Kansas, so I'm sort of used to that. But then I moved because of school to LA and then Boulder, Colorado. A little bit different approach to guns there. But yeah, anybody can just walk up and buy one. So I work some now with Everytown for gun safety. And one thing that they're advocating that I think is good is just make the background checks actually universal. That's not going to solve everything because there's no perfect law, but it will reduce gun violence to some degree. So that's one. One thing that I think is more urgent even than that is to have some kind of national, or at least through all 50 states, what's commonly called red flag laws, or extreme risk protection orders. So this is where a family member, healthcare professional, police, a friend can say this person is a danger to themselves or others, and they would get if they have guns, they're removed from their custody from anywhere, depending on how they can get into court, a few days to 2 weeks. And if there's evidence, then they're removed from their custody until they're capable to have them again. Now, a key thing there is you want due process, because you don't just want to be able to remove,
Hmm.
have your guns removed just because your neighbor is mad at you about, mowing a swath into their yard or whatever. So part of that is you have to have actual evidence and provide it. But I think, look, the states where that's happened, Maryland was one of the earliest ones to adopt it. A sheriff in one of Montgomery County, Maryland, I believe, said out of the first 305 that were valid, five of those were potential school shootings that were averted. So that one, I think, can really have an important impact
Okay.
fairly quickly.
What is it true that most people that um are using guns to shoot people, like, illegal use of guns to kill people, or well, let's leave aside the suicide one for a second. Would you
Yeah.
say that criminals using guns are they buying guns legally? Would gun laws um, even if we made guns illegal, would that reduce the number of criminal activity with a gun? Is there what's the evidence say on that? Is there evidence? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a hard question because there are so many guns. I think I mean, there are a lot of guns sold illegally. But it could, actually, there's evidence, like the city of Milwaukee is a good example. So a few years ago, there's one dealer within the city limits was selling a lot of what are called junk guns, right, without really doing background checks. So a large number of cheap guns found their way into the city. And then once they clamped down on that, this is from memory, so
Yeah.
roughly a 30% drop in gun crimes just because of that. I mean, people made that connection because it was such a big supplier. So part of the problem is buying them illegally, and so you've got to have. That's why just having the background check's not going to solve it, because there are a lot of guns out there in circulation right now. With that in mind, it would be a longer term thing. That as guns become less available illegally, we might see more impact over 10 or
Yeah.
20 years. But yeah, I mean, another problem is people who can't pass a background check. They have like straw purchasers. So
Yeah.
someone will buy the gun for them, go through the background check. And sometimes it's really obvious. They'll come this is why this one gun shop got in trouble. People would come in. It was clear they were buying it for this other guy,
Oh wow.
and they would just run through it. And yeah, here you go. So yeah, that's why it's a hard issue, because when you've got that many,
Yeah.
people can get them, but there's evidence that you can reduce it, right? I think we always want to think, well, if we just do this, we're going to solve it.
Yeah.
But there's a policy angle we can take. There are other ones as well that are probably, I would say, actually more important. But
Would love your thoughts on a couple slogans. Number one, guns don't kill people. People kill people. If they don't have a gun, they'll use something else. Is
yeah,
that valid or?
uh, I have a whole chapter in the book on slogans like that, and luckily enough for me, that's one of them. And that's one. It's sort of it's valid in a sense because it's true, but of course the response is, if you want to like just marketing or trafficking cliches, yeah, people kill people with guns, and it's a lot easier to do it, right? They're much more efficient. So I debated a guy several years ago in print, and he said something, take away guns, people use knives, take away knives, they'll use rocks, or you're going to ban rocks because Cain killed Abel with a rock. I'm like, well, yeah, but guns are more effective, right, at killing. And so I think, especially from a Christian perspective, this is what I find really, I guess, interesting, is it sort of cuts against certain kind of theology, right? We think human beings are fallen, And yet, many people who would agree with that want sort of unfettered access to weapons that can do a lot of damage. So, um, I think we can make it more difficult for people to express that fallen nature using a gun. So, yeah, I would say there's merit in it, but you could say the same people don't kill, or people don't. Wait, nuclear weapons don't kill people. People do. Well,
Yeah.
I don't want my neighbor to have weapon of mass destruction. So, of course, that's extreme, but I'm just trying to point out
Yeah.
the flaw in reasoning. So,
It just seems over like a little, from my vantage point, a little too overly simplified and almost non-falsifiable, right? It's like, I mean, you're a philosophy guy. It's like, well,
yeah.
of course, people kill people, but that's kind of like it's kind of a red herring to the actual deeper, complicated questions that we need to get at.
Yeah, and there are some of those on both sides. And look here, and so here's an example of maybe why that's important. The guy, back at when the Newtown shooting happened in Connecticut several years ago, there was a school attack that same day in China, a knife attack.
Oh wow,
Well, nobody died. I mean, people were injured, but nobody actually died in that knife attack compared to what happened in Newtown, Connecticut that day. So the point's not that we should ban guns. It's not my claim, but they're deadly, right? And if
right?
we can, so that sort of reasoning that guns don't kill people, people do, well, yeah, but they make it really easy for someone intent on doing so to harm a lot of people quickly.
Right, right. There's also, and I don't know if there's been studies done on this. I'm sure there has, or if you can even measure it. But there's something, I don't know, like psychologically altering or powerful with having a gun in your hands. I'll never forget. So I own a few guns. I don't shoot people with them. I believe in nonviolence, so I don't. It'd be impossible for me to use them on an intruder because I don't believe I should. And I'll get some emails for that. But what was I gonna say? Oh, but so we do a lot of hiking in the mountains here, and there's some pretty aggressive wolves up in the Idaho mountains, and it's you go in the back country, and it could be somewhat dangerous. I don't have the same moral qualms shooting an animal that I do shooting a human. So I went and bought a handgun, okay, 9mm to backpack with. And even me, as somebody who believes in nonviolence, who would never, in principle, use this on a person, I'll never forget walking out of that store, which was incredibly easy to get, by the way. And in Idaho, I can carry it loaded with a bullet in a chamber on my holster, open in downtown Boise, and they changed the law a few years ago, which to me makes me nervous, quite honestly. But um, there was something, I don't know, in my own psyche, even given my worldview, there was something that there was just sense of like power that I felt, even driving home. Like, man, if somebody flipped me off, who do they think that, like, and I, I just felt that kind of like adrenaline almost. I mean, is there something to the almost unquantifiable psychological power that comes with somebody walking around packing a nine? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, I mean, of course, it's a case by case basis, but I think there is something to that. There's a documentary a few years ago called Armor of Light about a guy named Rob Shank. I don't know if you've seen that or
I know
heard of
I'm good
him,
friends
but
with Rob. Yeah, he's great.
okay, good. Yeah. So I've gotten to know him over the years and worked some with the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute. But yeah, in the video and in one of his books, he talks about shooting. I can't remember if it was an AR-15, but they're at the range firing guns, and he just talked about the adrenaline and the power and
Mm,
those kind of things. And so I grew up in Kansas. I grew up hunting
mm,
around guns. I own a shotgun.
mm.
So that's a little different because the kind of gun culture I grew up around was primarily about hunting.
Yeah.
And so I meant there's been this shift people call a shift in America from gun culture 1.0 to gun culture 2.0. 2.0 is more about self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's more relevant to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there is something to it. In fact, what's interesting, some of the military training, this relates to the character and sort of that how that impacts your psyche. Some of the training in the military that started happening because of the low firing rates, like there were, I want to say 10 to 15% in World War One. This is like verifiable, and the military has accepted it, of soldiers actually fired at the enemy. They either wouldn't fire their guns, they would fire into the air. So they adjusted their training. By Vietnam, it was a 95% firing rate. A couple things helped them, and it's one of them was the type of training they did, where they create a conditioned reflex to shoot, right, without thinking about what you're doing, which is understandable because you're trying, to be an effective soldier. You need to do that. But the unfortunate byproduct is that leads to a dehumanization of the other. Right? You're not even thinking about them as human. And then the other thing to do with that, and this is more a moral question, is if you can dehumanize the other by their less moral or subhuman, so racist epithets, things like that. The reason I bring this up, and this is talked about in by military authors, so it's not controversial in that sense. It's not like a pacifist just railing on the military. It's they accept it, right? Those same things are present in gun culture 2.0. So targets used to be bullseyes, then they were silhouettes. Now some targets that people practice with are photographs of actual human beings that you're practicing shooting. And it's the quick shoot reflex, right? There are these drills where you go through. And then a lot of some of these open carry, and this isn't all gun culture, it's a segment of it, but they talk about themselves. So let's say I open carry. I'm one of the sheepdogs, right? The other guys don't carry. They're sheep that I'm protecting, and then the bad guys are the wolves. And so I think all that stuff together is problematic from a Christian point of view because look, and yeah, I'm not a pacifist, but I've moved a lot closer to it actually doing the work on this book. And even since then, and I just bought like 4 or 5 books a Mennonite pastor friend of mine suggested. So I've been saying I'm not a pacifist yet because I feel I feel like it's coming. I'm about as close as you can get without it. But anyway, and I don't even know what I was talking about, but
Well, let me throw another slogan out.
yeah, go ahead. That's good.
This is the one that I hear a lot. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a
Good guy with a gun. Yeah. And that's another one I deal with. And that's demonstrably false. Like you can, and I give several cases where people have stopped bad guys with a gun through actually sometimes nonviolent means. And this was several years ago in Atlanta. A guy was in court. Somehow he got a hold of a bailiff's gun. I think he shot and killed a judge, shot a couple people and escaped. He ended up carjacking a woman. He's in her apartment. She starts reading to him passages out of all things, Rick Warren's A Purpose-Driven Life and the Bible.
yeah.
And he ends up letting her go, and she calls the police. There was the guy, one of the Waffle House shootings, I think, recently. He just overwhelmed the guy physically. So there's several stories where, look, and it's not the only thing.
Right.
And so I think just like when you start reading, as I am now, about the power of nonviolent resistance over the past even 100 years, you start realizing there's a power to it that can actually be effective. I heard a story of a guy broke into her house and she just took a strong authoritative tone and was like, no, you do not belong here. And it just kind of freaked him out and he left. Now, I'm not naive because not everybody's going to do that. But if someone's going to rely on a gun, my concern, I think I talk about a lot in the book here, is you've got to be well trained, and there's a lot of conditions. Some of them just, I would argue, are moral, some legal. Because if you've got a gun in the house, you're realizing, and there are terrible stories like this, you might shoot somebody in your family. You might shoot someone who you think's an intruder who's not. Are you willing to kill another person made in God's image in general, criminal or something? And then second to that, there are terrible stories I read about a teenage daughter popping open out of the closet to scare her parents, and then the dad shot her. The last thing she says, "Well, I love you, Daddy." I mean, it's just, as a father, it's just like every time I think about that, it just makes me sick. And so I think it all mixes together, right? America, we have this unique relationship to the gun. I mean, I was in high school in the 80s, so like loved Miami Vice and thought that was so cool. And that forms our psyche, right? The cool guy with a gun that you don't mess with. Tombstone's one of my favorite movies, so I'm not, but there's this,
That's
there's
such a good. I'm sorry, that's such a good movie. Well,
it is.
true. Okay, so I don't like the term pacifist, but for lack of better
Yeah.
terms, I believe in Christocentric nonviolence. Tombstone and Gladiator are probably two of my favorite movies, and I guess I can get away with it because these are historic. Right? The fact is, guns and violence and murder and all this stuff is part of history. So understanding the truth of history doesn't mean you whitewash it, you acknowledge it, and so on. So I don't think it's, people said I'm inconsistent with my choice of movies and my theological views. I don't know if maybe I am a little bit. I don't know. I don't think I fully am, but yeah, I love what you said about the scenario. I mean, I've often when you were talking, you've probably read a lot of Ron Sider on this, right? He's got a whole book on nonviolent revolutions and how I mean, from a Christian standpoint, I've often said, I probably got this from somebody else, but, like, Christ demands faithfulness, not perceived effectiveness.
Mhm.
Even if more times than not, killing the bad guy with a gun stops him from killing you, that might be perceived as effective. Doesn't mean it's faithful. And obviously there's so many passages in the New Testament I could cite to faithfulness leading to death. I mean,
Yeah.
so, but even that scenario of good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun, good guy whips it out, kills bad guy, or somebody breaking into your house. It's such a a two dimensional scenario, and I was in a blog exchange with Doug Wilson, who we had a debate about guns and Christianity and everything, and he's a really brilliant guy, but I remember bringing up like that's classic scenario. Someone breaks into your house. What are you gonna do? You gonna kill him or let him, rape your family? I'm like, okay, well, in this world you're creating for me, I have a few questions. Do I don't have a loaded gun in the house, so I wouldn't be able. Okay, let's just pretend you do. Okay, so I keep a loaded gun laying around my house with 4 children. Do you know the stats on how dangerous that is? Okay, well, it's locked away in the safe. I'm like, well, how can I go to my safe and get, like, in the real world, what does this look like? Okay, so just pretend like you can go to the safe, you get it, you come out, you got a loaded gun, he's got a loaded gun. What do you do? Well, am I a good shot in your fictitious scenario? Yeah, you're a great shot. Well, then I'd shoot the gun out of his hand. Well, no, you're not that good of a shot. Well, okay, well, I'd be scared I'd miss him and hit my kid in the head behind. If I'm not a good shot, I'm gonna start spraying bullets in my house. Where are my kids in your? The more you start pushing the real world situation, let alone the adrenaline and what happens to the human psyche when you're about to pull the trigger in that heated moment. I mean, trained military snipers say thousands of hours of training. I had a buddy who was in Navy SEALs. He was a trained sniper in buds, and I mean, top of the top. He says, do you know how incredibly hard it is to pull that trigger and the psychological impact that you live with for the rest of your life, even in a quote good kill? To think that you're just like from the hip, bam, got the bad guy. Like that is so shaped by an American myth, and I don't mean myth as in completely untrue, but I'll say American narrative that doesn't represent the full complexity of real life. Anyway, this is your interview, not my. I just you.
Yeah. No, that's good. And it's something I had to think through a lot because, as I had sort of just war, justified violence intuitions and beliefs over the years, and just, it's one of those things where it just seemed obvious, right? I remember we had a debate, like we would do these on campus, our philosophy department, and I took this sort of just war position, and I said, "What are you going to do?" I mean, it just seemed obvious to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then you actually start thinking and reading, and really more than anything, it was scripture that's pushed me to what this view I call peace building in the book,
Hmm.
which would push me, which is about as close to the pacifist or Christocentric nonviolence,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
as you can get without being it. And I think that's something that I think we have to take much more seriously as American Christians, because the triumphalism,
Yeah.
the uncritical acceptance of a lot of slogans, both left and right, but honestly, especially among evangelicals, it's primarily the right-leaning slogans with guns that we accept. There's just a lot of like, well, let's just step back a minute, and how have we been formed? Well, good for good and bad, and what do we do with that? And yeah, I just think it breaks the way people talk, and this is something you see people talk on social media. I actually discuss this a little bit in the book, the way Christians talk about their guns. I bought here's my new gun, and it'll stop this guy in his tracks, or my wife's got a pistol, don't mess with her. I'm just like, if you're going to take a gun in your hand as a Christian and you feel like that's something that you are led or permitted or obligated to do, that is so serious. It's not, it's minimized. So like, just like killing, yeah, I killed the bad guy in my house. Well, yeah. And then like, you're just going to not have a trouble sleeping that night. I mean, it's not, like your friend the SEAL said, these things have an impact. That's why veterans coming back, a lot of them struggle so much, right? Coming to terms with what they did. And we owe them an incredible debt of gratitude, obviously, for putting their lives on the line to protect, so we can sit here and do this stuff.
Yeah.
But we don't want to minimize the cost to them of that, and how that would impact us who aren't trained. I mean,
Yeah.
think about when your adrenaline's rushing. I don't want to have a gun pointed anywhere in the direction of my family, because I can't imagine how much fear and adrenaline would be coursing through my veins as an untrained, not
Right.
trained in that.
Right. I mean, the title of your book is God and Guns in America. Can you speak to the conflation, the intertwining of American gun culture and American evangelicalism? It seems like, again, I have not read your book yet. Is that a theme in your book? Do you address that, and how would you unpack that relationship?
Yeah, I do a little bit. A lot of the more God-centered stuff is trying to walk through scripture and sort of Christian thought about violence and gun violence, but there's a little bit about that. And I think for whatever reason, I mean, you think about the Bible Belt, actually the part of the country I'm in now. There's a strong gun culture. I know there is out west. It's different there in some ways. The Midwest there is, and often that gets intertwined with our faith, patriotism, family tradition. So I just was telling somebody the other day about this story. I went to the barber before the pandemic, and one of the other barbers, he was talking to the guy in the chair, and he just says, "Oh yeah, I've got a gun." And he pulls a handgun out of his front pocket, and it was one that's been passed down in his family. And I'm kind of used to it now. But the point of it is that was part of like this is like a valued family heirloom, for lack of a better way to put it, right? So that gets mixed in. A colleague on campus, when we were talking about the book briefly, she said, "Well, I'm looking forward to reading your book because that's what we believe in, God and guns." And I don't know what, I mean, part of me wants to say this is just an annoying philosophical habit. I don't know what that means to believe in guns. I didn't do that to her because, I didn't want to ruin her day, but yeah, it's sort of somehow it's got intertwined, right? These views about America being a nation blessed by God, which it is, obviously in many ways, just like many other nations are blessed. And then the Second Amendment and guns and self-reliance and doubts about trusting the government. I mean, all that stuff gets mixed in. And evangelicals, I find, are the ones that often are kind of putting forth these cliches or throw out a proof text or two like it's settled. And I just want people to, okay, whether you agree with me or not, let's just sit back and look at some of these arguments, pro and con, look at the relevant scriptures. Let's come to an informed, spirit-led conviction, not just seat of the pants sort of gut reaction.
Yeah, that's good. I was meaning to ask you, with going back to the gun laws, what do you think of AR-15s or so-called assault rifles? I know there's a debate about even that phrase assault. I can assault somebody with my single shot 270. I didn't do a lot of damage, but it's not an assault rifle. Um,
Yeah,
or semi-automatic, but most gun, I mean, a handgun semi-automatic.
right.
Yeah. Anyway, what AR-15s, ban them or no? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Is a
I'm,
problem
I,
having AR-15s in our country, or?
I mean, I think it is a problem, banning or not. And here's the difficulty with assault weapons, and I sort of beg off giving a definition of the book. I say we just need to come up with a good one because it's like getting five philosophers in a room, ask them to define justice, right? You're going to go nuts, right? The assault weapon, when they define it, either sometimes it's too narrow or it's so broad that it like somebody's semi-automatic 22 rifle that you give your 10-year-old or
Right.
something fits. So yeah, it's tough, but I guess my thought is there's some reason why the AR-15 keeps getting used. I've got a friend of mine who was in the military, medic. He said he would never take that gun into combat, right? Because it doesn't have the kind of fire, stopping power or something you would need. But I don't know. It sure is effective in these mass shootings. So yeah, I guess that's an area where I'm not sure. Now you'll be surprised we're going to get into this topic. I was actually on podcast the other day. This came up. One of the guys lives in Texas about feral hogs in Texas. Do you know about this? Like wild hogs, like they're a problem in Texas. And so this guy said, I need my AR-15 because like a mass of 50 of these like really dangerous pigs show up in my yard, like eating my crops or attacking my family, and people roasted him on Twitter, but it's actually a real problem.
And you need a AR-15 for that? A good old
Well,
270 or
yeah,
yeah,
that's my
22 probably
question.
wouldn't do the trick, but
No, yeah, I guess one bullet doesn't bring them down, so you need a larger caliber. But another guy I know I've been dialogue some on the internet talks about like, protecting sheep, like literal sheep, from coyotes and wolves. So
okay.
I want to be open to that stuff, but
Yeah.
I guess that's where my skepticism comes in. I think I'm not sure, those are like the exceptions. Do we need wide access to
Right.
these? And if we're gonna allow people to have them, that's where I would like tighter controls meeting some conditions
Yeah.
because you can kill a lot of people in a short amount of time,
Was that
and
Matt
that's the problem.
Anderson that said that? I'm just kidding.
That's
Matt.
right, of course.
Matt. You got wild.
Yeah.
Matt, you should dig up bow hunting, man. Come on. Bam, bam,
Yeah.
bam.
Yeah, he
Anyway,
was just waiting to pull that one out.
Matt's great. Me and Matt go way back. We agree on most things in life, except for some things surrounding this conversation. But
Yeah.
yeah, he's a very smart guy. More guns, less crime. I think that's the title of a book actually that I
Yeah.
was reading a while back. That if we reduce the number of guns, crime's going to go up. And the argument, which is actually a good one, I think a good. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but like if you're a criminal and you're going into a neighborhood, you're going to rob a house. If you knew that there was a gun in every one of those houses, would you be more likely or less likely to go steal the TV or whatever? So I mean, that's a good art. And just to clarify my own position, like my main focus is on the ethics for the church. I am very
Hmm.
kind of Mennonite-ish in that way. I'm an exile living in Babylon, and my main focus is to have a strong exilic community and theology. As far as Babylonian politics and how Babylon can manage its own crime, like I don't have the authority or even framework to do that. So in a sense, when it comes to gun laws and all this, I don't have a necessary or particular investment or knowledge. I don't claim to have any knowledge on this. So I'm just a learner. So it maybe more guns would mean less crime. Maybe it wouldn't. I just don't think it's ethically right for a Christian to shoot people. So anyway, but in terms of the policy, is that true? More guns would equal less crime, or is that debated?
Yeah, that's pretty hotly debated, and really, there's the main guy that makes that case, a guy named John Lott.
Yes.
Him and Gary Kleck are kind of the two
Yep.
main sort of researchers, and yeah, I guess there's look. So I think I've read some criticisms of Lott and some responses, and as a philosopher, I hesitate to get into all the because I don't understand, how people crunch numbers and statistics,
Right.
but from reading people that seem to understand it, I think I don't buy his research about that. There's an intuitive sense of that, right? But it looks like the data doesn't show that necessarily. That's a
Okay.
minority view. Doesn't mean it's false, but people that know this stuff argue against it. And I actually there's a book called The Gun Debate: What Everyone Needs to Know.
Huh.
It's for normal people. It's not written to academics, and it's pretty fair. Like it's honest about certain flaws in gun control policies and
Okay.
talks about what works and what doesn't. That's actually something that helped me a lot. And then I read some other stuff too. I would say this though, that's true both for Babylon and for the church. Is number one, American. Let's start with America. American democracy aspires to something higher than that. We don't just want everybody armed and where we're just sort of like a détente between two gangs, as one author put it.
Hmm.
He has the book called "Do Guns Make Us Free." Um, Furman de Brander. It's hard to say his last name, but it's an excellent book. So that was some. We should aspire to more than that, just in American democracy, right? And he makes the point. There was a situation. He was in Baltimore where an elderly man, right? People were saying, well, he should have, if he was armed, he would be safe from the gangs around him and the drug gangs. But 20 young guys with guns aren't worried about an 80-year-old guy with a gun, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're not. He's vulnerable either way. Um, Maybe less so, but
Yeah.
I'm skeptical.
It
They're
does
not
also
going to avoid
feel
his house.
it does also feel a little again two dimensional. More guns, less crime. Even if that's true, more guns would also mean more accidental shootings, more suicides, more mistaken identities, more shooting somebody who is trying to steal your flat screen and sell it because his family's starving to death and now you killed him. That doesn't make stealing right. It just means there's a fuller context here that in the split second decision of I have a gun, he's a criminal, bam, bam, justice is done. That's not the
Yeah,
real world. And if again you keep that loaded gun around the house so that you can grab it quickly when the guy's breaking in, you now put your kids at a much higher risk. Or if it's in the car and your car gets jacked and now you have an illegal gun. There's even if the narrow binary of more guns less crime, that doesn't solve the layers of complexities that come from that. I, I've
yeah,
got I've got questions about, and this might get us into an area that we're not, neither you or I are prepared for. I don't know. But I think of over like 4th of July weekend. There. I don't know if it was a record high, because I haven't paid attention to every 4th of July in the history of, since I've been alive, but it seems like more people were killed last 4th of July than I have ever seen. I mean, in Chicago alone, I think 111 people were shot. Something like 18 or 20 were killed. Many of them were underage teenagers and children. Atlanta had a lot. Baltimore, I mean, they're all over the place. And South Chicago obviously has been, a hot, a hot place for loads of gun violence. How do we address that, man? And
Yeah.
it includes race conversations, it includes poverty conversations, so I know it's probably really complex, but do you have any thoughts on kind of like, yeah, that kind of gun violence going on in America?
Yeah, and it's the past, like this past month. This was actually prior to the July 4th weekend, so it probably be even worse now. So Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, I think Atlanta, three, but at least those first three jump to mind. There's a recent story. Gun, like the number of shootings is up 45 to 55% over just a year ago.
Wow.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
Now, I think we've got this pandemic stuff in the
Right.
mix too. People are just, I mean, we all, I've got it pretty easy. I can still teach and I've done my job, and
Mm,
but there are times where I'm just like, I'm sick of this, and so I've got sort of these pent up emotions and stuff. So yeah, there's a ton of stuff there, but yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. So the July 4th stuff, different parts of the country, it's like we celebrate July 4th, shoot your gun into the air. So guns are, people are drinking, kids are around, guns are out, bad things are going to happen accidentally.
mm,
And then just, yeah, like all those cases you mentioned. So the poverty, yeah, this is where I just think the solution has got to be, it can't be just policy, and it can't just be changing, people's one heart one person at a time with the gospel. It's got to be all that stuff plus a bunch more, so
mm,
there are people doing really good work, churches on the ground in these communities. If we could resource them more, if addressing poverty, addressing the mental health issues, addressing, they people that feel hopeless, or there's the drug, I mean, all kinds of
yeah.
stuff leading to gun violence. And so I'm not naive enough to think you make it harder to get a gun, that's going to solve it, but that's one small piece.
Okay.
I would actually prefer. I mean, if it was up to me, if I was like king for a day, there are some policy things I'd change, but I would go more at what I think of as the moral and spiritual issues, right?
Okay.
As yeah, let's just what's eliciting so much violence and careless violence out of the human heart, and how can we address that in an individual and a social basis?
I love what you said about the church. Yeah, I heard a couple pastors that are in South Chicago, and to hear them talk about what they're doing to help, just reach out to teenagers and try to, like you said, address the heart issue among individuals who are being raised in this environment. Now, you need structural change, obviously, but it's a both and. This is the problem I see. I don't know, in some of the race conversations happening today. It's like either it's all individual responsibility or it's all structural, and you kind of take away human agency and or individual agency. And it can't be an either or. Right? I just see this pendulum keep
Yeah,
swinging back and forth, and it's so sad. The farther you read on the left or the right, the farther on the right, then it's like all individual. There's no structural problems. Farther on the left, it's almost like we're just a bunch of robots defined by our group identity, and there is no individual moral responsibility. It has to be both, right? It has to be. Like, how can you
yeah,
not say it's both? But
yeah. I'm with
um,
you on that for sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think, Chicago is a case where people often say, look, gun laws don't work because Chicago has strict ones and gun violence is rampant. This is what, addressed. This is one where there was a study, I think, of guns confiscated by the police. I want to, in the 2006, 2011, something like that. 30% of those guns came from one gun shop, traced back to one gun shop outside of the city limits, I think in Indiana.
well, yeah,
So it's
Chicago's
kind of
minutes
like,
away from Indiana, so having
yeah, exactly. So
Illinois
it's
or
like
even
saying,
Chicago,
yeah, it's actually makes the case for more widespread restrictions on who can get a gun or the conditions.
yeah,
Because look, if for anything, okay, I can't get them here. Well, I'll go down there and buy 100 and then
right,
sell them on the streets or whatever. So, um, but anyway, yeah,
yeah. This is why it seemed like, and again, this is way outside my area, but it seemed like laws would have to be made at a federal level because we live in such close proximity to other states. I mean, on another level, it's like Idaho doesn't have marijuana is still illegal in Idaho. Well, I live 45 minutes from the border of Oregon. It's funny, the freeway coming in Ontario, Oregon, the last stop before you come into Idaho, there's this massive pot dispensary there. It's almost like they have a drive-through. I don't know if they have a drive-through, but you just
Yeah,
go in, grab it, go into Idaho, and it's like, well, I'm not saying it doesn't help or whatever if people in Idaho think it still should be illegal, but it's like, I don't know, like it's not that hard to get around it on a legal level, let alone, obviously buying stuff illegally, whether it's guns or pot or whatever. But um
right.
man, well, one more question. I mean, it has to do again with the church and the gun culture. I have you experienced just a lot of just heatedness, emotional attachment to like the Second Amendment, in ways that are unhealthy, and where did that come from, and how do we, again, not how do we, I'm not saying at all how do we do away with the Second Amendment, but maybe dethrone it so that it's not this
Yeah.
like 11th commandment in the Bible or something.
Yeah, that's something that has bothered me, especially among evangelicals who are part of the sort of taking scripture seriously, really high view of the Bible and those kind of things. And yet there's this appeal to the Second Amendment like that settles the issue. And now it does legally, especially given Supreme Court decisions in 2008, 2010 about the individual right to own a gun. But of course, as Christians, that's important for us as American Christians, but much more important is, well, what does Scripture say? How do I answer these questions from as a follower of Jesus? How do I
Right.
answer these questions? That's what matters more. And so, actually, Rob Schenck, you hear him say occasionally, we've replaced the Second Commandment with the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah.
And there's something to that, right? I mean, yeah, I look the Constitution. I'm good with it, right? I don't ask for banning the Second Amendment or think of course our country. I mean, we see this now, a mix of good and bad, a terrible legacy in many ways.
Uh-huh.
We don't live up to our ideals, but if I'm a Christian, it doesn't, and that's not the question. It's the spiritual question that I mean, I hate to use this old slogan is the "What would Jesus do?" kind of
Yeah.
question, right? And I just struggle, and this is probably what pushes me more to nonviolence. Is I really struggle to see if Jesus was here today. It's hard to see him carrying a gun. I just
Right.
can't picture that, and so that's what challenges me the most.
Yeah.
As a follower of Christ, right? I'm supposed to live his life
Well,
or live my life as if he were in my shoes, and that's a tough one.
well, one more quick political question, because I'm
Yeah,
you might be more knowledgeable on this than I do. I've heard mostly conservatives or Republican Christians say, "Man, these liberals, these Democrats, they're just going to take away our guns. They say they're not, but they are." And I've heard sound bites of people saying, "Yeah, absolutely, I'll take away your guns." I think Beto O'Rourke or others, I've
yeah.
heard quotes. Do you think? I mean, is that just from a purely political perspective? If say Biden gets elected, or say there's a lot of or maybe it's not Biden, maybe it's the next one, whatever. Um, is that? Do you think that's a real possibility that they would make guns either very, very, very hard to get, or they would literally come and take away people's guns, or do you think that's just a fear kind of tactic?
Yeah, I think in general it's a fear tactic. I mean, there surely are people in the Democratic Party, broadly speaking, who want that, who would want to repeal the Second Amendment. But look, I mean, in the United States, I'm not worried about if Biden gets elected. Any more than I mean, look, they were all worried about it when Obama. We
Yeah.
still have our guns, and actually, gun sales and ammunition sales. I mean, my dad talked about he couldn't get ammunition for his shotguns because whenever it was available, people would buy it up because they're coming, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, look, of course, that's a right enshrined in the Constitution. It's not easy just because someone takes power as a political party to get rid of it, right? It's going to have to go through the Supreme Court. Um, but look, I think out of the two parties, Democrats are more willing to do some of these things. Although there is, from my experience doing a little work in D.C. on this issue, both Republicans and Democrats are open to like the red flag law. That's one reason I think. I mean, there is some common ground where
Okay.
we can take guns out of people's hands who are demonstrably a danger to themselves or others.
Okay.
But yeah, I think just like people on, it's just like everything else. It's like the liberals this, the Democrats that, the Republicans this, and as someone who identifies as a moderate and is registered independent, I get the joy of just saying you're all wrong, just stop it. And it really bothers me when Christians do that. It just
Yeah.
especially like the Democrats are this or the liberals or the
Yeah.
lefties. I'm like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Just let's, yeah, we have disagreement. Let's do better. So no, I'm not worried about that. Now, who knows in 50 or 100 years, but
Yeah.
um, look, right now it'd be political suicide to do that in America. But there is broad, I mean, surveys show most people want more restrictions while protecting the right. And I
Yeah.
think it'd be smart to do that and right.
Yeah, that's yeah. I'm 100% with you on politics. That's exactly where I'm at. I just imagine a scenario when people say, "Oh, they're gonna come take away our guns." I'm like, if that went down in Idaho or Texas, or I mean, do you know that that would be World War III? There are more.
Yeah.
The average person in Idaho, I swear, owns 50 guns. I mean, I don't know if that's a stat, but it's everybody I meet has, like you said, that your friend with $1,500. That's like, oh, dude, I got people that would go far. They collect guns like baseball cards. Like I used to collect baseball cards, and
Yeah.
they're, the government's not going to tell me what to do. Like that would be not just political suicide; it would be all out literal war. I mean,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I think left or right, fear, you want to get people to give money, support you. Fear is
yeah,
effective, right? So both sides use it. And
yep,
I just think it's overblown.
yeah. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show, and thank you for your work. If you want to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/theology in the raw to support both the podcast and the YouTube conversation. Mike, many blessings on your future work in this area and beyond.
Yep. Thanks. Appreciate it, Preston.
All right, take care.
You too.